The biggest story in the NFL this week involves the Jets, but I just don't think it should be that big of a story. Let's break down the Aaron Rodgers minicamp saga today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Thursday, June 13th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoyed the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Today we're going to do our weekly mailbag. Normally we do our mailbag shows on Wednesday. This week we're going to do one on Thursday. And our first question is about the biggest topic surrounding the New York Jets this week, the Aaron Rodgers saga. Aaron Rodgers did not attend the team's mandatory minicamp. He got a very small fine, and it's like the number one story in NFL national media. And our first question, John, how worried are you about Aaron Rodgers not showing up to minicamp? And I kind of addressed this a little bit on the last show we did, which was on Tuesday. And I have to say, I'm really surprised how much of a life this thing has taken on. I mentioned on the show that, I guess I was expecting Aaron Rodgers to draw more attention than Hassan Reddick, but I wasn't expecting it to be like the number one story. I kind of brushed over the Rodgers thing on that show just because I wasn't expecting it to drive the narrative this much. But I guess it's Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is a lightning rod for criticism. In fact, let's be honest. Aaron Rodgers revels at being a lightning rod for criticism. Aaron Rodgers has kind of turned himself into a lightning rod for criticism. So I guess anything he does kind of takes on a life of its own. I also think that there is something to do with, I mentioned this on the show Tuesday. I think there's something to do with the idea that there's just not a lot going on right now. The May, June, early July period is the quietest period on the NFL calendar. So people need content, podcasters need content like me, writers need content. They need something to blow out of proportion. So I guess the Aaron Rodgers skipping minicamp thing provides them with an opportunity for content. But I think about these things in terms of how will they affect the Jets on the field this year once the calendar turns to the autumn, once the real games begin. And I would have to say, zero. That's my view on how much this matters for Aaron Rodgers. I think that when a player skips minicamp, the mandatory part of the offseason program, now everything before minicamp is voluntary. Players don't need to go. Players are required to attend the mandatory minicamp, and if they don't, the team can fine them. But these are small fines. I think Rodgers was fined something a little over $30,000, and for a guy with a $37.5 million salary, that's a slap on the wrist, if that. But I like to think about: is this a sign that the player's disgruntled? Is he unhappy with his contract, or does he want to trade or something? Is it a sign of unrest between the player and the team? And in the Hassan Reddick situation, certainly Hassan Reddick is, skipped minicamp because he's unhappy with his contract. That's something that could have an impact on the team. And I don't want to overstate my level of concern with Hassan Reddick because, as I said the other day, probably somewhere between 3 and 4 on a scale of 1 to 10. It's not something you can completely dismiss, but I also feel like because of this time of year, again, things get a little overblown, and there's still plenty of time for the Jets to resolve everything with Hassan Reddick. So I'm not overly worried about the whole Hassan Reddick situation, but I'm more worried about it than I am with Aaron Rodgers because I don't think there's a lot of utility in these offseason practices. I think that if you're a young player who's developing, who's got inconsistent technique, then these offseason practices can have some utility. They can help you, give you reps, extra reps to really kind of develop more consistent technique. But for veteran players, for proven players, these guys know how to prepare for the season. I mean, have you ever seen a Jets loss where you blame somebody not going to the minicamp? I kind of doubt it. I kind of doubt that has anything to do with anything. I mean, the players are going to have training camp, which is where they actually prepare for the season. These mini camps, I mean, they're doing it because the teams want them to do it. I mean, I think the players could get rid of the entire offseason program. In fact, there actually was recently a proposal for the players by the players to just get rid of the offseason program and begin training camp at an earlier date. We're not sure whether that's going to go through or not. But Aaron Rodgers knows how to prepare for the season. He skipped the mandatory minicamp in Green Bay in 2021 and went out and won the MVP. And this is clearly not a sign that he's unhappy with the organization. He he attended the voluntary part of the offseason program. So it's not like he skipped the entire offseason program. He had a commitment this week. Now, people are asking, should he have gone on vacation? Reportedly, he's going on some sort of vacation this week. Did he have to go on vacation this week? I mean, we don't know the answers to that. Was it something time sensitive? I guess that's the question. There was the one report was he made these plans after he suffered the Achilles injury before the Jets had released their schedule for the offseason program. Now, I mean, look, Rodgers could have guessed when the offseason program was going to be. Also, even if it's a non-refundable trip, I mean, non-refundable trip for Aaron Rodgers with a $37.5 million salary is probably a little different than a non-refundable, you or me going to our boss saying we have a non-refundable trip. You would guess that unless there was something super time sensitive that Rodgers probably could have been in minicamp if he wanted to be. But I just don't know that it really makes that big of a difference. I mean, I've heard some people speculate, well, it shows that, the head coach can't discipline his player. Well, we already knew that. I mean, I don't know that it sounds like a loaded phrase if I make the expression the Jets have made it clear Aaron Rodgers is bigger than the rest of the team. But I mean, that's what they've done the last 2 years. They've made it clear that Aaron Rodgers is the guy in charge. They made it clear that the rules do not apply to Aaron Rodgers. And I'm not, I'm trying to think of a less loaded way to say it, but that's essentially what the Jets have done. And it's not that unusual in the NFL. When you have a quarterback who has a Hall of Fame resume, they have a lot of power. They have a lot of ability. The Rodgers skipped this because he could skip it, because there's really nothing the team could do behind give him an inconsequential fine. And look, he's got that power. Now, I don't think most teams, even teams with Hall of Fame quarterbacks, are as explicit about the amount of power the quarterback has as the Jets have been with Rodgers. But I mean, if you're trying to say that this shows that Rodgers doesn't, the Rodgers is really in charge, well, I'd argue we already knew that. Does this mean people are suggesting Rodgers lacks commitment to the team? I mean, I don't get that impression from the guys in the locker room when you hear them talk. I mean, it sounds like Rodgers is a pretty popular guy. He's still viewed as the leader in the locker room there. So I view this whole thing as kind of, and maybe I'm contributing to the problem here because I'm talking about it now, and I've gone on here through this first segment talking about how it's not a big deal, and if it really wasn't such a big deal, maybe I just should have kept my mouth shut. But I just don't see how this is going to impact the team in 2024. I worry about the Hassan Reddick thing a little bit. And not even that much, but I do worry a little bit about Hassan Reddick. I don't worry about Aaron Rodgers, though, because Rodgers, there's really nothing to worry about. I mean, look, if Aaron Rodgers doesn't play well this year, it's not like this minicamp would have saved him. So what are we really talking about here? He's not unhappy with his contract as far as we know. He hasn't expressed any unhappiness in the year plus he's been with the Jets, with the organization. And we know Rodgers is not a guy who's shy about expressing unhappiness with the organization. Now, do the Jets wish he was there? Well, they kind of told us that by fining him. Jets very easily could have just excused his absence. They didn't do that. They very explicitly told us it was an unexcused absence. But I don't get the feeling the Jets are furious about it. I think the Jets wish he was there. I think it's one of those things. Well, we wish he was here, but it's not going to be the end of the world. So I'm sorry. There are things to worry about with this team. Aaron Rodgers skipping minicamp, to me, that's just like nothing. That's really a non-topic. That's right. And I'm contributing to the problem here because I'm going on of talking about it, but I'm explaining to you why I just don't think it's that big of a deal. The head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll look a little bit into the future. Jets have a lot of key players they're going to need to make decisions on in the next year or two. Who should stay? Who should go? I'll give you some thoughts on that continuing here on this Thursday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Gametime. I'm sure local basketball fans won't want to hear about this, but the Boston Celtics are on the verge of winning the NBA Finals. They're going for the sweep in Dallas. And if you're in Dallas, check out Gametime and you want to go to the game. Gametime makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets, but you can also buy tickets to other events. If you want to go see a baseball game this summer, you want to go out to Citi Field or Yankee Stadium, Gametime's the place to be. I've used Gametime myself. It's so easy to use. You just pull out your phone or mobile device, open the app, a couple of clicks, a couple taps, and you're there. And you've got just unbelievable deals. I still can't believe some of the last-minute deals I've gotten using the Gametime app myself. Not only do I tell you about Gametime, I use the app, and I love it. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, one word with no space, LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to everydayers. Tomorrow on the show, I'm going to have Ken Fang of awfulannouncing.com. Awful Announcing is a site that covers sports media, and we're going to talk about the changes you'll see this year in NFL coverage. There's some changes at CBS, at Fox, the way the NFL is utilizing streaming. It's going to be a great discussion with Ken Fang of awfulannouncing.com. That's tomorrow on Locked On Jets. Today on Locked On Jets, we're doing our weekly mailbag show. Let's continue. Our next question. How many of the top 4 players from the 2022 draft class do you think the Jets can realistically re-sign? And what is your priority order? I mean, they can re-sign all 4. The thing in the NFL is you can prioritize 4 players. I mean, there are a handful of players who are your core players who you can afford, and that number is higher than 4. So if the Jets want to do it, they can. Even despite, I think they're going to have some cap issues going forward, but I don't think it should not cost them any of these core players. I think that if they want to keep all of these guys, they should be able to. What you can't do once you start re-signing these guys is the lower level guys are the guys you can't afford. So it'll be somebody like, they won't be signing guys like Tyler Conklin in the future, or, hopefully they sign guys like DJ Reed, but it just means there's going to be less money to spend in free agency to bring other guys in. What priority order would I put them in? Well, Sauce Gardner, number 1, because he's maybe the best corner in the NFL. And it's kind of interesting because I don't think corner salaries have caught up to wide receiver salaries. Wide receiver salaries have exploded across the league, but wouldn't it make sense that, like, if wide receivers are a premium position, if wide receivers are really important, shouldn't the guy who can eliminate a wide receiver be that important? I think so. I think Sauce Gardner is maybe the best corner in the NFL, so he'd be number 1. Number 2 would be Garrett Wilson. The only reason he's behind Sauce is because he's not the best wide receiver in the league. But Garrett Wilson has given the Jets a legitimate number 1 receiver, really, for the first time since Brandon Marshall. So he'd be number 2. Number 3 would be Jermaine Johnson. And that's only because, the running back position is kind of unique. You got to be very careful with the second contracts with the running backs. I think the other 3 guys, it would be difficult for me to have an issue with the Jets paying Sauce Gardner a lot of money. I think even something on paper that would be an overpay for Garrett Wilson would be fine with me. I don't think Jermaine Johnson's looking at like top of the NFL pass rusher money because he's not at the top of the NFL pass rusher. The one I'd worry about is Breece. And I think you have to be careful with Breece because you got him under contract for 2 more seasons. And if you want to, you could franchise tag him for 2 more. So you really have Breece under your control for 4 more years if you want to. And historically in the NFL, second contracts for running backs can age very poorly. Now, if you're careful about it, if you work out a deal that's not a huge contract, if it doesn't reset the market, it can be fine. But I'd like to see them re-sign all 4. Breece would be the one I'd be a little bit worried about, though, just because of the position he plays. But he also doesn't have a lot of wear on the tires yet, so I feel like he might be a guy who could play well pretty deep into a second contract. So, I mean, I think that would be my order. So also be number 1 just because he's the best of all of them. Garrett would be number 2 because he's such a playmaker. Jermaine would be number 3 and Breece would be number 4. And really the reason Jermaine's ahead of Breece and the reason Breece is last is really just all about the position he plays, not anything to do with Breece Hall being a bad player. Next question. Rank these players from most likely to least likely to be named first team All-Pro. And the players are Quinnen Williams, Sauce Gardner, Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson. Okay. Most likely Sauce Gardner because, look, he is a top 2 corner in the league. So to be a first team All-Pro, you got to be one of the top 2 corners in the league. I think he is. So that's an easy one for number 1. Number 2, I think I'd go Quinnen Williams just because he's got a track record of doing it. And I think that, there aren't a lot of great running backs in the league. But I think it's tougher to do it at the running back position. Probably a little tougher for Breece Hall to get there. And I think right now, maybe what's the tiebreaker for me for Quinnen over Breece is that Quinnen has proven he can do it. Quinnen's proven he was a first team All-Pro 2 years ago, whereas Breece is like, we think he can do it. I think he's going to be great. I wouldn't be shocked if he did it, but it's still a theory because we haven't seen him do it. And now maybe the reason we haven't seen him do it yet is because of the offensive line, because of the lousy blocking he's had in front of him. But until we see it 100%, we've seen it 100% with Quinnen. We've seen he can do it. We think Breece can do it. So I put Breece behind Quinnen, but Breece would be number 3. Look, Garrett's number 4. I love Garrett Wilson. I'm not convinced he's Garrett Wilson could be a Pro Bowl receiver. He's a 1,000-yard receiver, and that's really valuable. But there are a lot of thousand. There are like 27 wide receivers who went for 1,000 yards last year. Could his production go up with Aaron Rodgers? Of course it could, but my sense is that Garrett Wilson's probably maybe like a top 15 receiver. To be a first team All Pro, you have to be a top 2 to 3 receiver, and I think that that's a lot to ask for Garrett Wilson. I think his skill set's very good, but I don't know if his skill set is first team All Pro good. So I think Sauce would be number 1, Quinnen would be number 2, Brees would be number 3, Garrett would be number 4. I think, and I'm not saying Garrett can't do it. I just think that of those 4, he's got the furthest to go. Next question from Chris. John, let's say the Jets do make the playoffs, and when the playoffs begin, their starting roster is in relatively good health, and that wherever there are injuries, there's at least a decent backup in place. If that were to happen, do you think it's a legitimate possibility that they would have a chance to win the Super Bowl? I know we don't know exactly how other teams will end up looking, but it would be great to hear how you could imagine some of the different how the playoffs could play out if the Jets made it healthy. I think this Jets team has a very high ceiling. I think the Jets, our friends at FanDuel have the Jets at over under of 9.5 wins. And for most of those teams, it's like if most of the teams at like 9.5 wins, it's because you think they're going to be a 9 to 10 win team. With the Jets, it's like the Jets have so much volatility because they're defending on so many guys who are really good, but also really injury prone. So I think they're kind of factoring in that there's a possibility that everybody gets injured and they have 6 wins, but there's a possibility if everybody stays healthy, they could have 12 wins. So that's the question. That's one of the big questions for you is, can they stay healthy? Because if they can stay healthy, the sky is the limit for this team. I think this team absolutely would be a legitimate team that would have a legitimate shot to go to the Super Bowl. And it would come down to the teams you're expecting to be there. I mean, you never know, though. I mean, this time last year, Baltimore wasn't really viewed as a legitimate Super Bowl contender. They ended up being the best team in the regular season in the AFC last year. I think Kansas City is always going to be there. Cincinnati, if they have Burrow, we can surmise that they'll be there. Buffalo's going to be tough. Buffalo's lost a lot of guys, but they still have Josh Allen. But look, if with an offensive line, if it's anchored by Tyron Smith and Tyron Smith's healthy, you're going to be in good shape. Aaron Rodgers, if he plays, Aaron Rodgers could be a big upgrade no matter what he does, if as long as he stays on the field, because you're upgrading from Zach Wilson and Trevor Siemian and Tim Boyle. And the defense we know is if everybody stays healthy again, is going to be really good. So the question with the Jets, maybe question number 1 with the Jets is, can they stay healthy? Because if they can stay healthy, this team's got a shot. Look, I don't know if they're going to be favored over Kansas City. I don't know if they're going to be favored over Baltimore or Cincinnati. Maybe there's a team that comes out of nowhere, or Houston's a team people are viewing as a legitimate threat this year. I think the Jets, Jets would have a shot. Jets would have a puncher's shot at the very least if everybody stays healthy. That's the key for the team. Will everybody stay healthy? Now, head on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to some news. There was a little bit of news, a player signing, and the Jets made a big announcement about their preparation for the season. We'll get into those continuing here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Thursday. We've been doing our weekly mailbag, but there's a little bit of Jets news to break down today. The Jets released their schedule for training camp in the year 2024. The Jets will once again be at their team facility in Florham Park, where they've been for many years. Rex Ryan used to like to take the team up to SUNY Cortland for training camp, and Rex was really big into the team bonding stuff. And on a level, I understand that, but on another level, it's like this team has this $80 million state-of-the-art facility, and you're not training there for the season. But ever since Todd Bowles took over, the Jets have stayed at home for training camp, as most teams in the NFL do now. Camp will get underway Wednesday, July 24th. Jets will have 8 practices that are open to the public. There's going to be one July 27th, one July 30th, one August 3rd, one August 7th, one August 8th, one August 13th, one August 20th, and one August 21st. Now, of those 8 practices, 2 of them are actually going to be joint practices. The August 8th practice will be a joint practice with the Washington Commanders. The August 21st practice will be a joint practice with the New York Giants. And that's something Robert Saleh's really been big on. And there really haven't been many Jets coaches before Robert Saleh recently who have been big on having joint practices during training camp. But Todd Bowles had one with Washington back in 2018, Sam Darnold's rookie season. But I think that was the only one Bowles ever did. Adam Gase, I don't recall him doing that. I could be wrong. I don't recall Adam Gase doing them. Rex was not big on them. So it goes back to 2005 when Herm Edwards' last season, the Jets and Giants had a joint practice where they had to fight, and after that, it took the Jets 13 more years to have another joint practice. But I think you're seeing this trend of joint practices kind of rise in the NFL, and that probably goes hand in hand with the lack of playing time big name players get in preseason these days. Teams don't like to put their big name players on the field during the preseason these days because they're afraid of injuries. And so I think like a lot of times these joint practices are kind of taking the place of the preseason games where the players get reps, but it's a little bit more of a controlled environment because the coaches can stop things during practice. Look, there's always danger. Carl Lawson got injured in a joint practice the Jets did with Green Bay back in 2021. He suffered that Achilles injury. But I think the coaches view it as less risky than putting players in games. And the Jets certainly don't like to, if you've watched the Jets the last couple of years of preseason, they don't like to put their starters out for that long. So I think like that's how they think, that's the way they think the team views. I think that's a mechanism the team views as a substitute for preseason, is that you're still practicing, you're still going one-on-one against opponents, but it's not as intense, and like the coaches have more control over it to try and prevent injuries. So the Jets have 2 joint practices this year. They're 2 of the 8 practices the Jets will have in training camp that will be open to the public. And the last piece of news, Jets made a minor signing. It's getting a lot of attention because it's a former first-round pick, and also going back to what we discussed about how this time of year, there's not a lot going on. So anything that happens, people kind of blow out of proportion. But Jets did sign a veteran defensive end, Takaris McKinley, guy who's really bounced around the NFL. He was drafted 2017, a first-round pick by the Atlanta Falcons, and his career got off to a decent start. He actually had 13 sacks through his first 2 seasons in the league, a 7-sack season and a 6-sack season. Well, since 2019, he's got 7 sacks in total, and he's bounced around the league. He's played with a bunch of teams. I mean, he's played with the Raiders, the Browns, the Rams. He's played on the Cowboys and Titans practice squads. And he hasn't played in an NFL game since 2022 with the Rams. And like, you can overthink this stuff. I mean, in reality, you have 90 training camp spots. A lot of them are going to go to guys who are long shots for the roster. I think with what the Jets have at defensive end, I know I'm assuming Hassan Reddick's going to be back by training camp, or I'm assuming he's going to be back by week 1. But the Jets have a lot of talented defensive end. Defensive end's a crowded spot. And look, even if Hassan Reddick's not back, I don't think this guy that just signed McKinley is really much of a contender for a roster spot. It's just when you bring 90 guys to training camp, there are some guys who really just don't really have much of a shot. Only 53 guys make the roster. I think McKinley might be playing for a practice squad spot. Maybe he's the type of guy who can earn a spot on the practice squad and earn a call up if somebody gets injured. But there's just not a lot of production there. But again, you can't use all of your spots on guys who really have much of a shot. But this is probably getting too much attention just because of the status as a former first-round pick, and because, well, frankly, there's not a lot else to talk about these days, unless you want to go on, unless you want to hear the 250th take about Aaron Rodgers skipping the team's offseason minicamp. So that's the news for the Jets today. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoyed the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the show. Have a great Thursday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow. I'll be with Ken Fang of Awful Announcing. We'll talk about some of the changes you'll be seeing when you watch the NFL on TV or streaming services this year. I think it's going to be a good discussion. Tune in then.